Recovered alcoholic. My name is Pat Rogan.
Pat Rogan.
And thanks to the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous outlined in this big book, which is the program of AA. I recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and for that I'll be forever grateful. I can't even express my gratitude. We were talking before the meeting. This is my life. And the reason is because I didn't have a life when I got here. I had no life. I hated the life that I lost. Even everybody that loved me and everything I loved was gone. And I had to buy into this. Without this, I have nothing. Everything in my life that I have is because of AA. Because of my participation in AA, and I just can't get enough of it. I just love being here, and I thank you guys for letting me be here. I actually am doing the 9th step on the 9th week. That's freaking unbelievable. That's for me, and I might lose that trend.
It's not playoffs.
Yeah,
it's not playoff season.
And I always feel kind of awkward doing the 9th step when there's people in the room that have 30 days and 60 days and 90 days. And it's don't start here. Don't start here. There's a lot of work. There's 8 steps that come before this 9th step, and there's a reason for that. It's there's a lot of work to do before you get here. A lot of knowledge to acquire before I got here. And we live in these 3 dimensions. We live in this spiritual, mental, and physical dimensions in life, and the first thing we do is we get right in the spiritual dimension, at least make a decision to get right in the spiritual dimension, and accept the idea that the only solution to my problem is a spiritual solution. And that's a requirement. We just read it. There's 2 requirements for AA, steps 1 and steps 2. 2 requirements for recovery, not for membership, but for recovery. The ABCs are the first 2 steps. Without an admission of powerless, none of this makes sense. There is no step 2 problem. There is no step 3 problem. There's no step 4, step 5, step 8, step 9. There's no step problem. It's a first step problem. If you're convinced that you're powerless over alcohol in any form, then you have no option but to accept a spiritual solution. And that means I can't stay stopped, that there's no human power on this planet that can keep me stopped. Yes. Now, for me, that wasn't a hard thing to come to terms with because I had given up my child. I had given up custody of my son for a drink. All right. See a pirate hat. Pittsburgh? From Pittsburgh? You just found it. It was imperative. I come to terms with that. There's nobody I loved more than my son. And I could not stay stopped for him. I could not stay stopped for my mother. I could not stay stopped for my wife. Twice. So it was obvious that I was powerless. So what are my options? Go on to the bitter end or accept spiritual help? Right? Die an alcoholic death, die an addict death, or accept spiritual help. And only we would have to ponder that. Only we would have to say, well, I'll get back to you. What kind of death is it going to be? Because if it's going to be a quick, painless death, I'm in. Right? But if it's going to be slow and painful and I might survive the suicide attempt, then I'll ponder the options. I put a gun to my head and pulled a trigger before I came here. And it's only God must have grabbed my hand and moved that gun to shoot my waterbed, which didn't go well. That's how much I hated my life. There's nothing I hated more than my life. I think that's true with most of us that come in here, or why would we? Unless we're court-ordered, or we're trying to make a family happy or parents happy, why else would we be here? Nothing I hated more than well, there was one thing I hated more, and that's change. I hate change. I hate my life, but I don't want to change. This is all about change. This is all about change. But I had to accept the fact that I was powerless. I had to accept the fact that there was no human power that was going to solve my problem. That only a power greater than human power was going to solve that. And whatever you think that is, spirit of the universe, creative intelligence, energy, whatever you think that is. Go from no, if you're an atheist and you're sitting in this room, just go from no to maybe. Maybe this will work for me. That's because what else what other choice do you have? You have another choice? Our book says our hats are off to you. Now, I'm not a guy that'll sit here and go try your addiction again, because you may not make it back. You know, I'm not a guy that says, well, go have another drink. I'm not that guy. Because I see people go do that and they don't make it back. I would never suggest that you go on another run to convince yourself that you need to stay stopped. They ask us these questions. If when you honestly want to stay stopped, page 44, 2 questions. When you honestly want to stay stopped, you find you cannot. Given sufficient reason, our book says. Going to jail, losing a loved one, losing your marriage, ill health, I'm going to die. Given sufficient reason, you find you can't stay stopped. And once you start, you can't control the amount you take. Have a seat. You're in. You qualify. And that being the case, then you suffer from an illness that only a spiritual experience, only a spiritual awakening, only a personality change, only a change in your ideas, emotions, and attitudes will solve. Only change will solve. I hate my life and I hate change. Well, only change is going to solve your problem. What do I have to change? What did they tell you when you got here?
Everything.
Everything. There's only one thing you got to pay, Pat. Everything. Everything you think is wrong. My sponsor, when he went on vacation one time, he said, hey, Pat, if you think it's a good idea, test what the opposite of that would be. And then ponder that before you take any action. And most of the time, he was right. Most of the time, when I thought about the opposite of what I was going to do, it was a better option. But those are requirements. That to make a decision in step 3 to get right spiritually, in that first dimension, to get right spiritually. And then we go into the mental dimension, my thinking. Where is my thinking flawed? Are they right? Am I really selfish and self-centered and driven by fear and self-delusion and self-pity? Am I really stepping on the toes of my fellows and they're retaliating? Is it really my fault and not theirs? I said no. And Jim B said, well, put it on paper and see if you're right. Gotta love these meetings, man. You gotta see. This is the discipline that we're talking about here, right? You know, this program is about following simple directions. You know, and it tests us to see if we are capable of that. You know what I mean? Like just simple stuff. Like I shared with you guys about wearing a collar when you're at the podium. You know, like they thought, well, why? It wasn't about the collar. It was about, Pat, can you follow one simple effing direction? Why? Can you be at the meeting 15 minutes early? Why? We're just asking you if you could be here 15 minutes early and help us set up. Well, why? Can you shut your phone off? Can you stay off your phone for 1 hour? Can you put the crack down? It's like that, right? Like asking somebody to stay off their phone for an hour is like asking them not to smoke crack. It's an addiction. It's all about the dopamine, man. It's all about the attention. Did she respond? Did she like my post? I see the green lights on for God. I know she's there. It's all about the dopamine, man. It's all about the dopamine. Unbelievable. I digressed, didn't I?
Little tip.
Let me tell you something. As soon as I put pen to paper, the transformation started. Right? Now, I'm talking about this because all of this is necessary to get to step 9. All of this is necessary to make the amends in step 9. To see the truth about myself. Yes, this is my fault. 90% of this is my fault. For me, it was maybe 95% of this is my fault. 5% of it isn't. Well, what are you going to do about that, Pat? Well, you're going to pray for them. What? Yeah, a simple direction. Just a simple direction. I just want you to follow directions. Why would I pray for this asshole? You know? Because it's good for you. Because it's good for you. Don't worry about them, but it might help you. All right, God, give her what she deserves. You know, that was my first prayer for my ex-wife. You know? Give her exactly what she deserves, Paul. You know? But you know what? And I shared with you guys earlier, in that simple give her what she deserves, and I'm praying for her on a daily basis saying that, you know what comes to me? Pat, why would you want your son to be with a miserable mom? Wow. Are you really going to kick your son out of his house, out of his bedroom, because it's your house? And God starts to enter my heart. It starts to make me see some love and some patience and some tolerance for the people around me. For the first time in my life, I start to see it from a different angle. That's what the 4th step says, right? We start looking at life from a different angle. Instead of playing victimese, let me see what's going on in their life, and maybe I can help. Maybe I can do something positive. Why? Because we're asking you to do that, Pat. Because we're asking you to follow another simple direction. Do something nice for somebody. See what happens. My life started to transform in the 4th step. But the real spiritual experience for me came in 5, and I shared that with you before. You know, I found the God of my misunderstanding in step 5. I had no idea. I did not define it. I just know that a power entered my heart in my 5th step that solved my problem, that removed the obsession to drink. It was the first time in my life I share with you that I was at peace without a substance in my body. And I wanted more of that. And that's what pushed me to go through the rest of the steps. That's where the transformation took place for me. And that was necessary for me to do 9. Without that transformation, I'm not going into 9 with the right attitude. And there's no coincidence that Bill stuck 6 and 7, the tools of change, in between 5 and 8 and 9. Because somehow I got to start changing to demonstrate that I'm different. I got to stop lying. I got to stop cheating. I got to stop being inconsiderate. I got to stop being selfish. I got to stop making decisions based on fear. Fear I'm not going to get what I want. Fear you're going to find out what I did. Fear the past is going to repeat itself. Fear of the future. And just sacrificing the now, right? Just sacrificing the moment over and over and over again. Because I'm worried about the past and the future and crazy life. My forehead unwrinkled in step 5. It did. I always look at people to see if their forehead's wrinkled. You know? Hanging in there, you know what I mean? How you doing? I'm hanging in there. I mean, I really kind of remember, like, I left that, my forehead was flat. I was like, I'm going to tell you something. When my forehead's wrinkled, I notice it. I notice it. On a daily basis, I notice, because it happens during the day. I mean, life is stressful. So I start to change. I love what oh, sorry. Sorry, guys. Paul says successful living comes from daily dying, you know? And each day I'm killing off that old self and creating this new self, becoming reborn, you know? I'm becoming this new person. This new person is starting to show some restraint and starting to show some love and patience and tolerance and starting to overcome fear with courage. And so I believe that courage is not the absence of fear. For me, it's the ability to walk through it. I'm no longer frozen in it. I have this power that can guide me through it. That's my demon still to this day. But I can get through it with God's help, with this power greater than myself. So I'm starting to transform. God has entered my heart because the resentments are starting to leave and they're being replaced with the love, patience, and tolerance and understanding. The fear is starting to leave and that's starting to be replaced with courage. But I got some unfinished business, right? Bill talks about the 3 forms of spiritual sickness in the 4th step. The resentments, the fear, and the guilt, remorse, and shame from hurting other people. That cloud is still there. That's the unfinished business. And here's the thing. By the time I got here, I couldn't wait to do it. You know what I'm saying? And I know if you're new here and you're looking at those steps, if you're cheating like I did, you're looking at made amends to people. We were reading the doctor's opinion and I was saying to Brian, am I going to have to call the IRS? He said, Pat, we're at step 1. We got 8 more, Maybe we go a little bit further and say, credit card, do I have to pay? Do I have to call the credit card companies? Pat, we're at step 1. Stop looking ahead. And he convinced me to stop at 1 step at a time, because 1 step builds on the next, and then that one builds on the next, and then that one builds on the next. And by the time I get to 9, I can't wait to I want more. I want more God. Whatever that is, at that point, whatever that is. Let me tell you, if you're new here, when I defined the God of my understanding? 15 years sober. 15 years sober. I put a name to it. And I'll tell you, and I'll tell the story later. I'm not going to tell it now. But I'll tell the story later. It was pain related. I can tell you that. All my spiritual growth has been pain related. I am forced to grow. I don't get up in the morning and say, damn, I'm going to grow spiritually today. Just not me. It's just not my nature. But I want more. The book talks about an attitude. By the way, step 9 is kind of like one of the few that describes exactly what we're going to do, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. It tells us what kind of amends we're going to make. We're going to make direct, eyeball to eyeball, right? Face to face. Well, when are we going to do that? Wherever possible. Not whenever, because that would be never for us, Wherever possible. And when are we not going to do it? Well, when it would hurt that other person, right? Very clear cut, right? And by the way, whatever your sponsor says, go along with it, but I'm going to tell you what I believe. We are not another. We are not another. I'm not on my 9th step. My freedom comes from making it right with you. The book says we should be hard on ourselves, easy on it. We should be willing to go to jail, the book says. We should be willing to pay any price to make that amends so that we can clear that wreckage away and not have to suffer from that cloud following us around anymore. And I'll give you some examples of that later. But I want to talk about, I lost my place here. Here's the attitude. We go to them in a helpful and forgiving spirit. Right? So these people that we're going to may have harmed us also. We may have retaliated. Or we may have done something and they retaliated. But we put that out of our minds. This is about our side of the street, not their side of the street. It has nothing to do with what they did. So we're going to them in a helpful and forgiving spirit. Remember I said last week, forgiveness frees the forgiver. Right? That's how I get freedom. By forgiving you, I get free. That's that healing circuit that Ben Troxel used to talk about, right? The healing circuit. I forgive you, God forgives me. I forgive you, God forgives me. That's how that works. So I'm going to them in a helpful and forgiving spirit. Rule number 1, Under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. The book later will say we're not servile or scraping, right? We don't beg for forgiveness and we don't argue about it. We're not going to fight for it, right? We're there in a helpful and forgiving spirit, and we do not criticize such a person. Rule number 2, we never try to tell them what they should do or what they should have done. This is about us. It's not about them. Okay? Rule number 3, their faults are not discussed. What they did is not discussed. They want to bring it up, fine. We're not. We're not. We're making amends. They want to make it. Okay. I'll accept it, but I'm not going there. I'm just there to clean up my side of the street. And it's really important, really important. And this is why we do the 8-step the way I told you last week, where we put, who did I hurt? What did I do? What was the harm? And then what's the plan for the amends? We write it out. This is where my sponsees need to talk to me before they go into the amends. And same with me. When I make an amends, I need to talk to my sponsor before I go into to make the amends and rehearse that amends, because I don't want to go into an amends and leave their own an amends. Right? I want to make sure I'm not going in there and I'm not going to create more harm. And what do I do? Like the book says, what do I do if they throw me out of the office? I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm leaving. Right? And maybe someday down the road we'll have another opportunity to make that amends. Maybe their attitude will change sometime down the road. I don't know. But I make the effort. And if it's not accepted, it's not accepted. I'm sorry you feel that way. I sincerely regret my actions. I got to go. And that's it. Done. And then Bill talks about the different types of amends that we're going to take. The first one is financial. Funny, that would be first, right? Most alcoholics owe money. That's an understatement. I had, I think I shared with you guys earlier, I had this, when I came to Florida in 1980, I got caught in a snowstorm. And I found a way to drink around the clock and still make it to work. And I was spending $300 a day going to work to make 80. And when you do that, you use your credit cards to survive. And I racked up $100,000 in credit card debt. And I was part of a company, I won't mention the name, but it's no longer in business. They had 25 stores, and I was co-owner, actually. My uncle owned it, and I was one of the officers. And they went out of business, and they owned some rent-to-own companies, and that got sold, so I got $50,000. And I was going through a divorce, so not to give her any of it, I put the $50,000 towards the credit cards. And I owed $50,000 when I got here. I owed $50,000. I remember telling Brian, I said, look, think about it. I said, you know how long it's going to take to pay that off? And he said, yeah, same amount of time as if you never send him a dime. He says, I said, it might take 20 years. He said, yeah, you got 20 years. Yeah. And I love Bill Wilson. Thank you, Bill. Arrange the best deal you can. And that's what I did. I called these credit card companies, and the one that I could get them to close it and freeze the interest, I made deals making payments to them. There were other ones that wouldn't accept any kind of terms, so I took that money and put it on no interest cards for 6 months or whatever it was. And then when that ran out, I moved it again to another card. And it took me 10 years to pay off the credit cards. And I paid them up. I paid them all up. There's no need to applaud, because that's what you're supposed to do. Right. You're supposed to pay them. That's how that works. And by the way, I learned a lesson. I don't keep any balances on my cards. If I can't afford it, I don't buy it. What a concept! Right? What a concept to live within your means. That's amazing. That's not the American way. Finance your ass out. But I don't pay. Very rare do I have a balance on any of my credit cards. And I don't have a bunch of them anymore. I just have a couple. But I learned a lesson. When I used to ask him, Brian, if I had to call the IRS, I didn't. They called me. And I think it's because, I filed the first tax return I remember I got sober in March. April was taxes. I filed my first tax return that I remember signing, right? And that may have thrown up a flag, you know, because it probably looked different than all the other ones that I filed, you know. And I got called in, and I got audited, and I did like Bill said, you know, he suggests, you know, take an attorney with you, take a CPA with you, don't go by yourself. See, and here's the thing. Taxes is a hard thing for me. I'm just not capable of being honest. I don't know what it is. I hate to admit it. I mean, 30-some years sober, and I'm telling you, I can't do my own taxes. There's spiritual warfare that goes on when I'm trying to do my job. You know, it's like, was that dinner business? What could have been? What do they know? You know, and I got to stop right there. But so I don't do my taxes. I have a CPA do the taxes. I don't go near there. But I brought Mr. C with me, my accountant, to the IRS. And I introduced him. And I said, this is Mr. C. He'll be taking care of this from here moving forward. And I looked at him and I said, I just now got into recovery. I was about 9 months sober at the time. I said, I'm 9 months sober. I said, honestly, that's the only tax return I remember signing. I said, you guys figure out what I owe. Let me know, and I will do it. And I left. And they went back that year. They okayed that one. They went back another year. I owed them $800 plus penalties. And they stopped and they said, stay the course. You know? And that was it. Clean. Now I don't have to, you know that, does anybody know that feeling when you owe the IRS money, when you've been cheating on your taxes and there's a letter in the mailbox that says IRS on it? You know that feeling? Like your heart just drops to the ground, and then you pretend you didn't get it, you know? Like you just throw that right into the garbage. You don't even open it. You just like try to, really burn it so there's no fingerprints on it. You know? That cloud's removed. You know, I opened them now. I see, a letter from the IRS. Wonder what this is, you know? I'm not afraid of that. The fear is gone. You see what I'm saying? We're starting to remove the things that are blocking us from the sunlight. I've got some sunlight from the fourth step, but now I'm starting to get more sunlight from 9. Right? Now I want more. Now what? You know, now what? So I'm doing this. I'll tell you what. I left the Derby Lounge one night and sideswiped the whole city block. Yeah. I mean, boom, 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 and parked in my house. You know. I got up the next morning. There was shit laying all over the streets, mirrors, and I'm out there with Bondo. You know, you remember Bondo, right?
Bondo,
they still
yeah.
make Bondo.
Yeah. Sure. Duct tape, Bondo. Sure.
How do you make amends for that? I mean, that's, you know, I guess I leave Pittsburgh in 80. That probably happened in the mid 70s. Right? I get sober in 91. There's no way I'm going to find those people. How do I make amends for that? Well, the book talks about indirect amends later on in the chapter. You know, how do I get right with the universe? Well, there's ways to do that. You know, shoplifting, Publix. You know, not you. You were one. CVS, Walgreens, Walmart. Yeah, that's a classic. Yeah. That's an easy one. See, all this stuff starts to come. These are financial amends. How do I make amends? You know what? Walmart's not going to take the money. They're not going to know how to take the money. You can go in there and admit you've been robbing them for years, you know? And like I tell my guys, when you put this on your 8-step list, put a number on it. You know, how much do you think you stole? Estimate. What do you think you took? 400, 500, 2,000, what, 5,000? What do you think you stole? Seriously. Now find out what charity that Walmart's involved in, and start making some donations in the charity, in their name, anonymously, whether it's $5, $10, whatever it is a month. Get right with the universe. Get right with the God of your understanding or your misunderstanding. That God, whatever you think that is. I need to clear away the wreckage. I need to clear my conscience. somehow. You guys contemplating how much you shoplifted? I got backed into a church one Sunday. I looked at it. I looked at her. I goes, "There's one amends." I let it go. You know, right? Somebody hits it a couple times. I just let people go. Don't worry about it. I got it. You know, and there's my amends. I'm going to try to make amends for those cars somewhere, somehow, when the opportunity arises. So one of the ones that I truly regret. This is who I was, right? This is who I was. There was this cop. See, we were entrepreneurs, you know, and we hung out on this particular corner, which was our corner, you know, and there was this cop who used to just harass us for no reason, you know. And he would come by and try to pick us up, and we, you know, just disrupting business, you know. And so we decided one night, drunk as hell, and probably some other substances involved, and to destroy his brand new Monte Carlo, right? So we busted all the windows out of his car, and I threw a gallon of paint all over the car and inside the car, right? That's who I was. That's where alcohol and drugs took me. I'll teach him to mess with us. Well, obviously, they investigate, and somebody drops my name, you know, and they put a warrant out, you know. And here's what he puts out there. This guy was Nick. Nick M was his name. I won't use his last name. And Nick put out there, this is a true story, and I would have never believed it if somebody had told me this. He said, if he just turns himself, there was 2 other people involved, if they just turn themselves in, I will not press charges. I just need to talk to them. Unbelievable, right? So we don't believe him, but so 3 weeks later, while we're hiding in bushes and shit in the car, you know, that gets old, by the way, when you can't walk the streets anymore, you know, we decide to get high and go turn ourselves in. And Nick lectured us for about a half an hour, and he said, look, the damages to my car, and I think it was over $2,000 or whatever it was. He said, I just want each of you to pay me a third of that. And I won't press charges, but I need you to make that compensate me for the repair. And we agreed to that, and I never paid him. You know, and I would run into him. He would see me on the streets once in a while, and he'd pull over and come on. I'd give my money to somebody and say, you know, I'm broke. You know. So I'm doing a step series up in Pompano, and I'm talking about the 9th step and the 8th step, and it comes on my heart. It wasn't even on my list of harms. Right? It comes on my heart. Oh my God. I never made amends for that. And so I tried to contact Nick. He was a Wilkinsburg cop. And they call it stalking when you're looking for a cop. You know, like they will not tell you where he lives or give you any information. You know. And so I'm phone book, made calls and stuff like that. Couldn't get a hold of him. So I decided, I decided to make an anonymous, not anonymous, in his name, make donations to the Pittsburgh Homeless Children Fund. As much as I could afford each month, you know, 25, 50, 100, whatever I could. And the truth is, I love the charity, and I still do it, you know, and knowing that I would never get a hold of him, right? 15 years later, now I'm 15 years sober when this comes on my heart. 17 years later, right? I'm with my sponsor. We're driving to my home group on Monday nights. And my buddy Dave calls, one of my old running buddies, Dave calls me out of nowhere. And we start reminiscing about the good old days, you know. remember when we got arrested stealing gas, remember when we shoplifted that door and the cops got, we were having those, those tragically funny stories, remember when we rolled that car over, we all walked out of that laughing our ass off. I said, yeah, remember when we destroyed that cop's car? And he goes, no. He says, I wasn't there. And I said, you weren't there? He goes, yeah, what cop? I said, Nick M. And he goes, Nick M. I said, yeah. He says, that's my uncle. This is God's honest truth, right? I said, you're kidding me. I've been trying to get a hold of Nick for 30 years, 15 years. And he says, yeah, it's my uncle. And I go, really? He says, yeah, he's dead. I said, you're kidding me. He said, yeah. I said, is there any way I can get a hold of the family? Because I know I owe his wife and children amends. And he said, yeah, his daughter's on Facebook. And he gives me his daughter's name. And I throw a message to his daughter. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's like letters that went back and forth. So I write a letter saying I did something I truly regret back in the 70s. I said, and I caused some damage to some property of Nick's and your families. And I know that I owed like $800 to $1,000. I don't know what it was. And I would like to make amends for that, whatever it would take. And she writes me back and she said, unfortunately, my father died, which I knew. And he said, but my mother is still alive. And she says to me, do you mind telling me what it was that you did? And so I write another letter back telling him exactly what we did. And she said, yeah, I was telling my husband, I thought it had something to do with paint. And she tells me I was 5 at the time, and we were afraid to leave the house. Right? My mother and I were afraid to leave the house. So, we talk about what I did versus the harm, right? What I did was I tore up his car, but you know what the harm was? His family was afraid to leave the house, right? Now, how do you make amends for that, right? And I told her the story, and she called back. She said, I thought it had something to do with paint. And she said, I said, well, I would like to make amends to your mother and to you, whatever it takes. And she said, well, I'm going to give you my address. She said, you can write my mother a letter, and I'll forward it to her. And so I did that. And the letter I got back was incredible from her. And she said, and I explained to him, I realized today what Nick was trying to do was teach us a valuable lesson that we could have learned that would have changed our lives, right? Instead of putting us in jail, which he could have done, he was trying to teach us something. And I told her I realized it this time. It took me 15 years to realize what he was really trying to do was teach us a life's lesson. And she said, yeah, I hear story after story after story how Nick tried to change young people's lives. She said, and she said, I'm sure he's looking down at your sobriety right now, and he's proud as hell of what you've become, And then I wrote her back. I said, what can I do to make this right? And she said, you can continue to contribute to that Pittsburgh Homeless Children Fund. And I said, I don't think that's enough. I said, I know I owe you $2,000, but I could be 10. How much do you need? Do you need anything? She said, no. Just continue to make that contribution. Right. So, I say that because these amends go on for the rest of our lives. Right. It's like we're willing to make them all of them. I'm willing to do them all. And I take the effort, and then I let God do the rest. Right. And when I was ready, when they were ready to hear it, God put them in my life. And I've had stuff like that happen over and over again. I don't want to get into relationships real quick, but, just recently, my very first girlfriend, my very first everything, right, showed up on Facebook. I had never been able to make amends for her. She showed up on Facebook. We're talking about, I graduated in 73. We dated from 74 to 77, somewhere in there. And I introduced her to 6 or 7 jails, a lot of different substances. I totaled her father's car. This is the kind of things I helped her experience, and I really, really wanted to make some kind of an amends to her, but I never could. I never knew where she was. And she shows up on Facebook. This is just recently. This is just not even a month ago. And I asked my wife, do you mind if I contact her? Which is what we do. We don't want to do any harm at home, because if she says no, I'm not doing it, right? So I asked her if she was okay with me contacting her and making a formal amends. And she says, no, not at all. And I contacted her, and we wrote back and forth on Messenger. And I told her, I really, truly regret what I put you through as a teenager. The jails and the car accidents and the drugs and the drinking. And she says, we were just kids being kids. And I said, well, that went on another 20 years for me. Funny how perception is different, right? Mm-hmm. The next one that Bill addresses in the book is the criminal stuff, which doesn't apply to probably anybody here.
No.
But, it's another thing. It's about facing the consequences, right? Getting free, removing that cloud, not having your heart fall to your feet when a cop car is behind you, or a road check, or a sobriety check, or whatever's up above, knowing that warrant is out there, I had one. I didn't even know it was out there. So I went to buy a weapon, and then there was I was allegedly arrested for a mescaline trafficking charge back in 1974, and the charges were there, but there was no disposition, and so they refused to sell me the weapon because of that. So I had to go back and make it right, make it go away. But I've got story after story of guys I sponsored. My buddy Rick. Look, most of us, not a lot of us are down here just for the weather, right? A lot of us came down from the north for the warrant, to get away from the consequences up there, right? But we got to face that. The book is telling us if we want to remain sober, or let's say this, if we don't want to live a life of quiet desperation, right? Because I'm sure there's people in here that just refuse to make that right, and they're willing to live with the wrinkled forehead. Okay. If that's all you want from this, that's fine. That's what I wanted more. I wanted more than that. Right? I wanted freedom. I didn't want to worry about the cops pulling me over. I didn't want to worry about all that stuff. But Rick had a warrant up in Boston. So we made a plan. We got a hold of an attorney. Right? He showed up. He was willing to face the consequences. He talked about his sobriety. We had letters showing what he was doing in sobriety. Can you believe this? The prosecuting attorney was in NA. Right? He pleads his case. He shows his papers to the judge. Everything. The judge says, look like you're doing pretty good. Prosecuting attorney is in NA. Right? He leaves there, has to pay restitution, probation, and he calls me. And he said, you're not going to believe what happened. I said, you're kidding me. I've seen miracle after miracle after miracle take place. Now, some people I've seen go to jail and be willing to go to jail. My friend Sarah did 2 years, right? Rick left, just probation and financial restitution. You're not going to believe it. I said, I believe it. And I said to him, do you remember Fred in the big book? He said, why? I said, it was the end of a perfect day. Not a cloud on the horizon, right? What did Fred do? Fred got high. Right? What are you going to do, Rick? I'm going to go to a meeting and share this miracle. There you go. This is where sponsorship and sponsee, this is where it comes together, right? Sarah is in my wife's program, facing 2 years, faces it, turns herself in. I'm willing to do that to get free. That's what she said. And you know what she did? She started a big book meeting in the jail. People are coming to my meeting on Monday night saying, Sarah sent me. I asked Sarah, I'm allowed to use her name. She knows. Those of you that know her, Sarah sent me to this group. We were in her big book meeting in the facility. And she came out and she's still sober to this day. We're willing to face any consequences no matter what the price that we have to pay. I have so many stories, man. I was at my home group, and I'll end with this. I was at my home group, and I had $400 in my pocket. I don't know why I was carrying around $400. Nobody uses cash anymore, anyway. You know, and I go home, and I get up the next morning, and I can't find the $400. Right? And I remember some guy buying a big book and me giving him change. And I'm thinking, maybe I dropped the money, he stole it. You know, this is where my head goes, you know, because he bought a big book after the big book meeting. Why would anybody do that? You know, I'm a detective, you know, and I can't believe I can't find this the money's gone. I think somebody stole it. And so I go back to my home group. The women's club is where my home group is. I go back there. I search the women's club, can't find it. Come home. Next day I go to work. I come home again. I get on my motorcycle. I decide I'm going to go look for the money again. It's got to be there. So I'm going crazy over this $400. It's eating me up. This is not that long ago. Right? So I decide, you know what? I take my bike. I go out to the Everglades. I go out the end of Locks Road. I'm sitting there. I'm praying. I need help. I need to let this go. And I'm looking at this gorgeous sunset. And here's what comes on my heart. Pat, do you remember the guy that walked out of the electrical supply house and he dropped his money on the ground? It was about $400. And you and your buddy picked it up and split it? You stole his paycheck? He had just cashed his check? Now you know how he felt. Oh. And all of a sudden I was just free and I said, man, how do I make amends for that? How do I make amends for that? You know how I do that? You know that homeless guys that stand on the corner? I don't judge them anymore. I don't say, hey, you look like you could get a job. Hey, you're healthy enough. No, I don't judge them anymore. What are you going to, you're going to buy beer with it. You're going to buy crack. You're going to buy drugs with it. I don't judge them anymore. I just give them something. I just give them something. I ask them their name. Make them a human being. You know, how you doing, buddy? Get some food, you know? And I just get to know them just for that moment, you know? And I'm going to keep doing that. And I don't care when the $400 is paid off. I'm just going to keep doing it, you know? I owe that much. Like I said, sometimes it's getting right with the universe, not necessarily directly. And when I can, wherever I can, I'm going to do a direct amends. But sometimes I got to do an indirect amends just to get right with my God, just to get right with the universe. So we'll talk more about that next week. Thanks for letting me be here.